my name is Gretchen Kelly. I am a mom of three, and I am a member of Long COVID Families. I am here today to talk to you about symptom tracking. First, I want to give a little background about myself and my daughter. About 6 years ago, my teenage daughter started presenting with some strange, vague symptoms that basically left us perplexed. The doctors weren't sure what was wrong. Initially, we thought it was anxiety or depression, but it definitely seemed like more than that. 6 years later, we have a diagnosis. She has a post-infectious illness. We are still in the process of treating it. But the reason I want to talk to you today is I want to talk to you about tracking symptoms. This is a really important part of managing your child's illness, figuring out what's wrong, figuring out if there is in fact an illness, if it is, it can help you rule in or rule out anything that may be going on. And it's also a really good tool for you to have to show to your doctor. This is going to provide them with information. It's going to help them. When you go to the doctor with your child, they have maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. They're under a time constraint. The more information you can give them, the better. So that's what we're going to do today. First, I'm going to kind of just give a little brief background about what we went through with my daughter without getting too specific. She started presenting with vague symptoms. This was a well-behaved child, excellent student. It took us about 4 years to get a diagnosis, which is actually fairly quick in the post-infectious world. So in that respect, we were lucky. If I had known then what I know now, I would have tracked her symptoms. I would have had a method and a process of doing it instead of just feeling like I was floundering. As a parent, when your child's going through this, it is overwhelming. It is scary. It's stressful. It's emotional. It's everything, all of that. And it can make it really hard to be objective and to have a sense of what's truly happening. So what I'm going to talk about is how to track your child's symptoms in a way that is scientific, that's objective, that removes the emotion. So the way that we are going to track symptoms, I'm going to kind of just walk you through a somewhat hypothetical, kind of a day in the life of what we went through with my daughter, to give you some specific examples and kind of demonstrate how you can do this. It can be as simple as you want it to be. The way I do it is I just get a notebook. If you want to make a spreadsheet, you can. If you want to do notes on your iPhone notes, you can. I just do a notebook. And what I do is I write out their basic schedule for the day, the time to wake up, if they eat breakfast and what they eat for breakfast, go into school. Did they stay at school the whole day? Did you have to pick them up? Just basically the basic routine of the day. And then I have a section where I write down symptoms. And what we do here is we write down the basic symptoms: fatigue, headache, nausea, if their heart's racing, whatever their symptoms are, you put them there. And then I use a 0 to 10 scale, one that's based on functionality. So for example, their fatigue would be measured. Were they able to go about their tasks? Were they able to go to school? Were they fatigued but still able to function? If so, that's going to be a lower number. If they were so fatigued they could not get out of bed, then that's going to be a 10. So that's how I rate it. I put a number next to each symptom to rate how severe that symptom was. That's really important to know. Fatigue can be a misleading word to some people. And so we want to make sure that we are demonstrating how this is impacting the child's daily activity and how it's impacting their life. So that number is really important. And on our website, we are going to have just a really simple symptom tracker that you can download. And we're also going to have those number scales that you can have for reference. You can save them in your phone, you can print them out, but that way you can see, you can have that to refer to, and you can even ask your child, Do you feel like you can get out of bed today? You can use that also to kind of ask your child questions, especially when they're younger. It can be harder to get these specifics. And then what I also add, I do this 1 page per day. I just write notes. I write down anything that I observed that day. How was their mood? You can go into a little bit more detail here, like they fell asleep on the way to school, which is not exactly normal, but it's worth noting. And we're going to approach this like a scientific observation, like a field journal. When you were in science class in middle school, and you would have to go observe, something in nature, you would have your journal and you would just write down objective observations. What did the organism do today? How did it appear? What changes were there? So that's kind of what we're doing here. So I'm going to just kind of walk you through a few days so you can kind of get an idea of how we do it. We're going to show it on the screen. And then after that, we can talk about how you then, after you do this for like a good chunk of time, maybe at least 3 weeks, how you can then go back and assess it and glean some information from it. Okay, so we're going to just start off with day 1. Like I said, we're going to track this for 3 weeks. I'm not going to walk you through all 3 weeks. I'm just going to walk you through a few days that kind of show some significant information. So day 1, she woke up. She went to school. I wrote what she had for a snack. I wrote that she didn't have breakfast. She took a nap after school. I made note of that. And then I wrote down what she had for dinner. And I wrote down that she did some homework, she took a shower, she went to bed, and at what time she fell asleep. One of the reasons it's important to note the food is because food can sometimes play a role in your child's symptoms, and that's something we want to be able to determine. Under symptoms, I wrote that her fatigue that morning, it was present, but it was relatively mild. It was at a 3. Her nausea was also at a 3. So she was nauseous, but she wasn't vomiting. And I'm going to pull up the number scale so I can kind of give you a reference. So a 3 on the fatigue scale is tiredness, makes it hard to enjoy activities. They're usually fun, but they're still able to work or study with some difficulty. So that's where she was at on day 1. And her nausea was relatively mild. She just felt kind of icky, just felt some nausea, but she was still able to eat a little bit. She wasn't vomiting, she wasn't dry heaving. So she had some nausea, fatigue. She also had pain in the soles of her feet. That was at a 4 because we also have a pain scale. It was moderate. She's consistently aware of pain, but she can continue her activities. So that was a 4. She was able to go to school, she was able to walk, but she said that she was aware of it all day. It hurt to walk. And her mood, that's another thing you want to track on the symptoms. Her mood was low. She just seemed withdrawn. And then in my notes, I wrote that she slept through her alarm, extreme difficulty waking up, complained of heaviness in her body, like she can't move. She was tearful, reluctant to go to school. She fell asleep on the couch after snack time and slept through the noise of making dinner. So little details like that can be kind of illuminating and let you know that this is not the child's typical behavior. A kid might fall asleep after school, but to sleep through the whole family and the dog barking, that's a little bit unusual. So that was day 1. The next day I have down is day 5. One thing that I did here was I initially wrote that she refused to wake up for school. I crossed that out and I changed it to unable because, again, we're trying really hard to be objective. We're not trying to put our own perceptions and emotions into this, which is really hard when it's your child. So she wasn't refusing to wake up. She was unable to wake up. Like this was not a child that was willfully defiant. That was not her nature. So this was alarming to me that she wouldn't get up to go to school because typically she was very concerned about her grades and absences. She did wake up finally at 10 a.m., went to school late. She came home at 3. She went straight to bed and she was crying and she fell asleep. She did eat a few bites of dinner. I wrote down what she had for dinner, and then she went to sleep right after dinner. So her symptoms were fatigue low mood, anxiety, pain, and intrusive thoughts. This was a new one for us, and I didn't even know what it was at the time, but intrusive thoughts are where the child is, or a person, anybody can have them, is thinking of doing something that is scary to them. It's outside of any action they would normally take. It would be maybe hurting somebody, hurting an animal, hurting themselves. And this is something that's out of character for them. That's why it's an intrusive thought. This isn't a compulsion they have. This is something that it's a part of OCD and anxiety. And sometimes people with post-infectious illnesses experience some of these symptoms, and they can be very alarming and scary if you're unaware of what they are. But that's one of the ones she was experiencing. I wrote about in my notes how she, not only could she not wake up for school, she couldn't even tell me why she couldn't wake up for school. Her fatigue was so bad that she couldn't even really explain it to me. She was just completely lethargic and drained. I wrote that she was scared about these intrusive thoughts, that they were causing her a lot of anxiety, that she was thinking somewhat violent thoughts. This is a child who wouldn't even kill a bug, that if there's a spider in the house, we have to capture it and put it outside. So this was something very outside of her norm. And that's another thing we want to emphasize is we are comparing, not only are we documenting this for how it's affecting their functionality, we want to also compare it to their baseline. Who is your child? You know your child. Who were they before they got sick, before they had COVID, before they had an infection that started kind of this whole cycle? That's what we're comparing it to. If your child was normally well-behaved, easygoing, and now all of a sudden they seem to be refusing to go to school, refusing to do homework, that's not in my view, that's likely not a behavioral issue. If that's not their norm, there's something else going on. And in the case of post-infectious illnesses, it's more than likely anxiety, fear, fatigue, illness. When we don't feel good, we act out. And that's a very normal thing to do. And especially when you're a child and you don't really know what's going on, it's incredibly scary. So I'm going to go on to day 9. This was a day where she actually felt good. She got up, she ate, she went to school. She even went to swim practice that night. She mentioned that she had to lay down during swim practice during dry land because she was getting out of breath and fatigued. But she was in a good mood and she actually had a really good day that day. I remember at the time thinking, oh, wow, maybe this is over. Maybe whatever this is, we're on the upswing. But then if I go to day 11, 2 days later, she couldn't go to school. Her fatigue was at an 8, which is basically able to sit up for a little while, but not really able to do much else. Even sitting up was taxing for her. On this day, she also mentioned that her heart was racing, her feet were numb, her legs, hands, and arms were numb, and she was very anxious. She was having a lot of shortness of breath. We had an O2 monitor and her oxygen levels were completely normal. So this was really strange. She was like gasping for air as if she couldn't breathe, but her lungs sounded fine and her O2 was normal. So we knew it wasn't an emergency, but it was very scary and very alarming. And she had extreme anxiety and panic attacks on this day. So those are the days that we are going to kind of look at now. And we're going to pretend as if 3 weeks of documenting these symptoms has passed. And we're going to go back and we're going to look for patterns. What kind of patterns did we see? What things were consistent? What things were the predominant symptoms and how severe were they? It's not just that somebody has some numbness in their hands and feet. Was it extreme? How long did it last? These are the kind of things that are the observations that matter. Another thing that we want to look at is symptoms that occur together. So if for my daughter, her shortness of breath and the tingling and numbness in her hands and her arms and her legs, sometimes even in her chest and her chin, those always kind of came together. That was a pattern we started to notice. We later figured out that she was diagnosed with dysautonomia, which is something that a lot of people with post-infectious illness experience, and it comes in different forms. And for her, that's how it presented, as shortness of breath, numbness, and racing heart. So when we noticed that all of those things came together, that gave the doctor information to help diagnose her with dysautonomia, which was really helpful because then we could get her on some medications to stabilize her dysautonomia. So you want to look for patterns, co-occurring symptoms, and you also want to be very aware that with post-infectious illnesses, symptoms come and go. They can be mild one day, severe the next. Your child could have days of seeming normal, and then they come back. In our family, we call it whack-a-mole. As soon as you feel like maybe this has calmed down and we're kind of on the other side of this, another symptom pops up, which is characteristic of post-infectious illnesses. Probably one of the most important things to know is that syndromes are constellations of symptoms. So you are looking at a whole group of symptoms, and sometimes a symptom will happen once, it'll never happen again, new symptoms come in. It's the whole picture. It's not just one thing. You don't diagnose a syndrome by just one symptom. It's all of the symptoms together. So that's one thing we want to understand. And one reason we also look for the patterns is the patterns can tell you if there are triggers. When she had the extreme fatigue to where she could not even wake up for school, that was 2 days after swim practice. Now we know that's post-exertional malaise, which is when you can do an activity, you might be feeling good. A day, 2 days, sometimes even 3 days later, we call them crashes. You crash and symptoms flare. And those flares can last sometimes for a very short time, sometimes for a very long time. So that was a pattern that we started to see, and documenting this helped figure some of this out. Another thing that you want to pay attention to is food. Sometimes food can be a trigger. If you take your child to a friend's birthday party and they eat a ton of cake, they might have some symptoms flare because the sugar can trigger some of these issues that come along with post-infectious illnesses. So the whole exercise is to help you understand what your child's going through, to validate it. That's really important. Anyone who's going through this needs validation from the caretakers in their life, because it's a very isolating feeling when you don't know why your body is doing it, and you don't have a name for it yet, or you don't have a diagnosis, or maybe even some of the doctors aren't sure, maybe they think it's all in your head. It's very isolating. So validating your child's symptoms, that you understand, you hear them, you're paying attention, you believe them. You believe them is the most important thing. So that's part of the exercise, is to validate this, to validate it for yourself too. As parents, we tend to question. We question our children, we question what they do, we question our parenting, we question our judgment. That's all very normal. This helps take some of that out of it. This helps make it very matter of fact and objective, which is exactly what you need. So I hope this helps some of you with trying to kind of get your arms around what is going on with your children, and hopefully bringing some information to your doctor that's going to help get your child a diagnosis and some help for some of the things they're going through. And again, we will have a symptom tracker up on the website. We have resources on the website with other conditions that tend to go along with long COVID and other post-infectious illnesses. But again, I hope this helps, and best of luck to you.